We are recording the interview of Ernest LeClair. This interview is being conducted by David Morse from the Wright State University's Veteran Voices Project. This interview is being recorded at the Crown Plaza in Dayton, Ohio. It is 1:59 p.m. on July 10th, 2019. All right, Ernest, we'll start off with when and where you were born.
I was born in Miami, Florida, December 1st, 1942.
Okay. Who are your parents?
Parents is Ernest James LeClair, and my mother was Mary Huddle, was her maiden name. And my father was a Coast Guardsman, so that's how I got sort of introduced into the military lifestyle, traveling around as a kid.
Nice, nice. Did you have any siblings?
Yes, I have a sister, Shirley. Lutfi is her last name now. She lives in Massachusetts.
Okay. And did she join the military?
No, she went to school for becoming a registered nurse.
Nice, very nice. Okay. And you said your father was a Coast Guardsman.
Yes.
How long was he in the Coast Guard?
22 years, stayed in for a full career.
Nice, very good. And he retired there in Florida?
No, we traveled all over the country. He was in the Carolinas for a while, Chicago. Massachusetts is where we ended up retiring.
Massachusetts, okay.
He was from New Bedford, Massachusetts originally, so.
Oh, okay, okay.
His last assignment was at the Pentagon, and then he commanded a Coast Guard station in Marshfield, Massachusetts, so he retired from there.
I see. That's nice, very nice. Okay, so what were you doing before you joined the military?
As a kid, I was always interested in aviation. Built and flew model airplanes as a kid. And that's what I wanted to be, was an Air Force pilot since I can remember. Okay. So I worked hard at trying to do that, and ended up better than I thought I would as far as my military career.
Really? Okay. So did you end up going to the academy, or did you go to a college in ROTC?
No, I went to Boston University and went through ROTC there.
Okay.
That was one of the few schools in the New England area that offered ROTC at the time, so that's why I chose Boston University. And I knew that sometimes as a pilot, you don't, health-wise, you have to be a very healthy person to have a career as a pilot. And so I decided to study engineering in school just so I'd have some kind of backup, something that I liked.
And so how was the ROTC program there at Boston? Was it good?
I wish I could say I loved Boston University. I did not go as a resident student. I commuted from, I lived relatively close by, so I commuted, and that made it very difficult, particularly for ROTC, because you didn't really have a lot of spare time when you commuted to school. But the program was great. I liked how they ran the ROTC program, and because I was a pilot candidate, then we had to go to one of the local airports and get some actual flying training prior to entering the Air Force. And that was quite interesting. It's something I did not expect to be able to do while I was in college.
Oh, yeah? And how did it feel the first time you flew a plane?
Just natural. Something I really wanted. It wasn't scary, it wasn't anything else. I just liked what I was doing, liked learning. It was a good program to go through. Learning to fly at a relatively young age while you're in college is not the easiest thing, but you do what you have to do to make it work.
Sure. And now, what did your father think of you going through this I guess journey and taking this route?
Well, he was a hardcore, I guess you'd call it a hardcore military type of person. He was glad that I wanted to do something meaningful with my life like that. And he knew that I had a desire to be a pilot, so he was very supportive. he did all that he could to make sure that my dream came true for me. So. And he knew what the lifestyle was like, so he knew what it took to be able to do something like that. Mm-hmm. He was all involved in aviation himself. He did not, back in the days, in the 30s and 40s, military was different. You didn't have to have a lot of education. He didn't even have a high school diploma. And yet he entered the Coast Guard, had a very successful career, was enlisted, went all the way to the top of the enlisted rank, was a radioman, flew on airplanes quite a bit, so he was familiar with what aviation was involved at that time.
Sure, yeah. So you flew there, did the ROTC program. How was your commissioning ceremony?
The ceremony was conducted in one of the rooms that the ROTC had. Parents and everybody was invited. Your military background yourself, you said?
Yes. Yeah.
So one of the traditions in the military is that the first salute. Mm-hmm. Normally you have a silver dollar that you bring in, and my father, they invited my father to come in for that, so he felt very nice that he would come and gave my first salute, and I gave him my silver dollar for that.
Yeah, that had to be really cool.
That was cool for him, it was, yeah.
Right. So, get through college, and then commissioned, and then where do you go from there?
I had about a 6-month delay. This was at I guess pretty much the beginning of the heavy involvement in Vietnam. My first assignment was as a student undergraduate pilot training at Moody Air Force Base in Valdosta, Georgia. Even though I had come from a military family, that very first assignment, that very first move to get there, that's a little bit awe-inspiring. So as you walk on the base, you look at these fancy high-performance airplanes, what we thought at the time were high-performance airplanes, and you walk on and say, man, they're going to pay me to do that. So that's how I got started in my career.
And what plane were you assigned to?
Well, in pilot training, there's 3 different airplanes that you fly during your training process. One is a simple Cessna 172. They call it a T-41 in the military. Okay. You went from there to the T-37, which is a twin-engine, relatively slow jet airplane. And then you went on to the supersonic T-38 after that.
All right. And how long were you on each aircraft?
The first one, the T-41, that's I think was 8 weeks, maybe 6 weeks. And then 5 months in the T-37, and then 5 months. And then 6 months in the T-38.
Oh, okay.
And you ended up with a total of about 240 hours of flying time.
It's a good amount.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Through all this training, so you're doing the flying, and then you're doing also lectures and book work and all that other stuff on top of that.
Yeah, it's most normal classes are 60 to 65 people in it, and they're split in between a morning session and an evening session, and you flip-flop every week. Makes it kind of tiring on your rhythms of sleep patterns and everything. But you get a morning session would get the classrooms followed by flying training in the afternoon, and it was more than just book work and lectures and flying. You also had military training, physical training. It was a very thorough program. Wow. Very tiring, long days. Get up before dark 30 in the morning and get there in time to get a morning briefing and go out and fly a couple of times. And march over to lunch, and then you had classrooms in the afternoon and physical training in the afternoon. And next week you flipped it. It was opposite. They made sure you were well educated and tired at the end of the program.
Yeah, sure. You couldn't really get a sleep pattern in.
No, it made it difficult at times.
Yeah. Wow.
But like anything in the military, you like hard work and you feel good after you finish your training.
Yeah.
Anything worth doing is hard.
Yeah, that's good. All right, so you get done with your training, and then are you assigned an aircraft from that point?
I don't know if they do it the same today as we did back then, but you, through all of your exams that you take and all your flying training and all the grading that you have, you get ranked in your class from top to bottom. Mm-hmm. And I worked hard, and I was very lucky I finished top in my class, so I got to pick the assignment that I wanted, and they'd be 60, if you have a graduating class of 60 people, they have 60 assignments, and the number one guy gets his pick from that assignment list, and then everybody falls down after that, so the very last person gets whatever left over.
So what did you end up picking?
Well, a lot of the assignments were the backseat pilot of an F-4. And there were some B-52s and a couple of transport airplanes, and then training airplanes. And I was relatively newly married. We just had our first child, and I didn't feel like going to Vietnam quickly and getting shot at that point, so I picked the training airplane. And I came back to the same base, Moody Air Force Base, as a T-37 instructor pilot.
Huh.
And that I enjoyed thoroughly. That was a fun job to do.
Yeah, okay. So as an instructor pilot, go through like your I guess day to day on that. I mean, how large was your class size at that point?
Most of the classes were 60 to 65 students, and there were it would be split up into 30 people in the morning, 30 in the afternoon, and each segment of the class would have their own flight that they were in and their own instructors, and generally 10 instructors per flight, and we'd end up with usually starting with about 4 students per instructor, sometimes 5. And then you have, in T-37s, you have 5 months to teach them how to fly an airplane. There'd be a very rigorous syllabus of instruction that each flight was pre-programmed on what you did on each flight. And then once the students left the flight line, the instructors would have their training they'd have to go through. They'd have flights of their own for upgrade training to make sure that they were as good an instructor pilot as you could be. So it was a long day for the instructors as well. After you flew a couple of flights with the students, you might fly another with an instructor in the afternoon.
Wow. So how long was your day usually?
If you were, let's say the morning week, the early week, you'd get in there about a half an hour before the students got there. So they're coming in an hour before daylight. You'd prepare for your sessions with the students, fly sessions there. It was about a 3-hour cycle for briefing, going out to fly, coming back and debriefing. You do that twice, and then after the students left, you'd be there probably another 3 hours after that. So if you were starting at, let's say 5 o'clock in the morning, you wouldn't be out of there until probably 3 to 4 in the afternoon.
Wow.
So, long days.
Day. Yeah. Now, were you're married at this point, so did you and your family stay on base, or did you guys live off base?
At the Moody, we were lucky that we were able to live off base. At most of those military bases back in those days, the base housing, they didn't have a lot of it, and what was there wasn't particularly good. So fortunately, most of the married guys had the opportunity to live off base.
So after a long day of work, was it mostly home with the wife and kids, or was there other types of activities and stuff that you were able to do with the, outside of training all day?
Anybody that hasn't been in the military probably doesn't realize it, but it's a very tight, close-knit community. So there'd be all kinds of activities for the family. It's all kinds of after-work activities. So when you got immersed in that, your days with the family particularly were very meaningful. The family got to participate in that type of lifestyle quite a bit. So even though you were working hard, you had a lot of things to do after the workday was over that kept a very close, tight-knit community.
Sure. Absolutely. And so then how long were you stationed there at Moody?
I was there for a little over a year as a student, and then I came back as an instructor. I was there for another 2.5 years as an instructor.
Okay.
And then after that, they opened up another pilot training base, and I was applied for that, and I went to Columbus Air Force Base after that same job, flying T-37s, but opening a new base there. And then I spent another 1.5 years there before I got assigned to Vietnam.
So Columbus Air Force Base, same thing. Now you got orders to Vietnam, and what year was the orders for Vietnam?
Well, at Columbus, it used to be a Strategic Air Command B-52 base.
Okay.
And when they left, they had several hundred empty houses, so we didn't have the option to live downtown there, so we lived on base at Columbus, which is interesting. The houses had been vacant for a long time, so a lot of cleaning. But it was worthwhile to see that side of the military. And Columbus was not a particularly friendly base for the citizens there, so
oh, really?
I guess most people wanted to live on base at that point. I was lucky at Columbus when I knew that I was going to be going to Vietnam. I went out to the Military Personnel Center and tried to find the best assignment that was available for my year group. This is in 1969 that I left Moody, and when I left Columbus, it was in I think it was April of 71. And when I went out to the Air Force Personnel Center, they had a whole list of what was available, and helicopters and F-105, I think they had a couple of F-105s and C-130s. And I said, oh, C-130s, that sounds like something that's really safe. And I was familiar with the airplane. I knew it was an interesting airplane to fly, so I was lucky I got C-130s.
That's pretty cool. I love that assumption that the C-130s are safe.
Not so, but that's what it seemed at the time.
All right, so so you chose the C-130s, and then with that, so you got the orders to where?
CCK Air Base in Taiwan, and something that even in civilian life that a lot of people don't realize is that you have to make a lot of your own opportunities sometimes. And in the military, if you don't try and steer your career where you want to be and what you want to do, there's ways of doing that, and that's why I went out to the Personnel Center to try and find the best assignment that I could. And if you apply that in not only military but civilian life, you need to do that if you want to really do the kinds of things you want to do. But being assigned to C-130s, there's a lot of training you have to do, parade training in the airplane, combat training in the airplane, survival schools, regular survival, jungle survival, water survival. And that whole process takes about 4 months.
And from what I hear, survival schools, any of them, are not that fun.
I enjoyed it, sort of.
Sort of.
I'm an outdoors type of person, and basic survival, it's not easy. They teach you a lot of stuff in there. They teach you really how you're going to act as a person under very stressful conditions. They put you in mock POW camps, forced marches out in the field. But this stuff you really need to know on how you're going to react in that type of situation. So I found it very interesting and very rewarding, but I don't want to do it again.
All right, and so you get through all your survival schools, and what was your first impressions of the C-130 once you actually got behind one of those?
Well, I knew a little bit a lot about the airplane before I got into it.
Okay.
But I flew T-37s, which is a small twin-engine relatively slow jet airplane. And it was at first a little overwhelming to have a crew with you, instead of pretty much being you and a student in the airplane. So that was kind of a little bit of a hurdle to get over. But the airplane is a miraculous, marvelous airplane. I just can't say enough about the airplane. The mission is very interesting. You get to fly all over the various parts of the world. In Vietnam, it was employed very the full capabilities of the airplane you use in Vietnam, short fields, airdrops, very interesting usage of the airplane and what it could do.
Now, when you first got to the CCK and assigned to the C-130, did you start off as a co-pilot or did you start off as a pilot?
Oh, I started out as a pilot. I was a relatively high-time pilot. In the military, you don't accumulate a lot of flying time, but as an instructor, you do. So I got there with a couple of thousand hours of flying time, which was a lot for a young pilot. And most of that time was instructor pilot. So the C-130 community is not used to a person with that kind of experience. So I was told immediately when I got there that not only was I going to be a pilot and aircraft commander, but I was going to be upgraded to instructor pilot in the airplane as quickly as possible. And that doesn't normally happen.
Right.
But because I had all of that previous IP time, it sort of pushed me that way. It's unusual in a C-130 because that's really the very experienced pilots that become instructors in the C-130. So that was a little taxing for me in the beginning.
Okay.
I was upgraded to instructor before I even had enough flying time in the airplane to allow co-pilots to land. You have to have 150 hours first pilot time in the C-130 before you're allowed to let the co-pilot land the airplane. Yeah, that's a rule that was over there at the time.
Yeah.
It's a little bit of like a duck out of water at first, but I was fortunate that my background and my education and my training, some hard work and some just natural ability, I was really considered a really good pilot. So, which is nice, except when you're in combat. Because if you're good, you tend to get all the tough assignments.
So, as a pilot of a C-130 there at CCK, what was your, I guess, your mission there?
C-130s in Vietnam were used for airlift, for transporting passengers, airdropping cargo, flying into very short fields. So you had a wide variety of, CCK is located in Taiwan, for people that don't know where it is. I had a lot of flying throughout the Pacific theater, as well as flying in Vietnam. So you didn't really have a normal day there. Sometimes you'd be flying a 10-hour mission over water to go from CCK to Japan to Okinawa to Guam. But the bulk of our flying was in Vietnam, in country in Vietnam. So you'd get about a 15-day rotation in country, followed by 5 days out of country to do some training back at CCK. And you do that probably 3 or 4 times in a row, and then you'd get something else where you're flying over water missions or different countries. But the bulk was in Vietnam, flying really interesting airfields and places you were going into.
So, if you don't mind describing some of the differences, I guess, between your combat flying experiences versus a flight to Japan or one of your standard cargo flights.
I flew for the Eastern Airlines for a while also, and there's an expression we used to have: hours and hours and hours and hours of boredom interspersed by moments of stark terror. And that's pretty much what that kind of flying is. When you're flying just regular cargo or passenger missions around the Pacific Theater, it's just hours and hours of flying, getting to where you're going. Not much excitement. Sometimes you might have some kind of airplane malfunction or an engine malfunction or something like that, kind of interrupted your normal days, but generally pretty boring, routine missions. And then you had Vietnam, where you had concentrated short duration flights rather than long duration flights over the water. So you might fly 6 or 7 times, six or seven different flights during the day, going into different airports and getting shot at frequently while you're doing it. But generally not that exciting. I was there between in 71 and 72. The war was beginning to wind down at that point in time, until they had the spring offensive in April of 72, and things got very, very different, very exciting at that point. We did not initially lose a lot of airplanes or have even a lot of battle damage on the airplanes when we were flying on normal missions there. There would be an occasional bullet hit on an airplane or something like that. And we did lose a couple of airplanes when I first got over there for the first few months, but generally very unstressful flights, just in some very difficult airports and stuff to fly into.
And how long were you at CCK altogether?
I was on an unaccompanied tour, so we had a 15-month assignment to CCK. There were other people there that were in different squadrons over there. They had a 2-year accompanied tour, and some of them were there for 4 years. Mm-hmm. I was just there for 15 months. But it's unaccompanied, you don't have your family. I was fortunate that I did get upgraded to IP, and that I did get to know a lot of the people within the squadron there. This is something you don't normally have the opportunity to do because you're out flying missions most of the time. But because I was an instructor, you spent a lot of time at CCK as well, and got to know a lot of the people on base. And I was fortunate in the summer of '72 that I was able to bring the wife and the kids over at that point in time, just so that they could see some foreign countries there. So they got to come over and spend some time at CCK with us.
Oh, that's nice.
Most of the people didn't have that opportunity because they didn't have that much time that they could spend directly at CCK. They were out flying missions most of the time. And a lot of my missions at that point were training new pilots and coming in country into the CCK for follow-on tours. I had flown some of the more high-risk missions just prior to that, airdrop missions that were conducted in the An-Loc area. So it was refreshing to be able to, after that all calmed down and things were pretty much back to normal, to be able to bring the family over to see some of the things over there.
Sure it was. What did you do, while you were at CCK that, kind of for recreation?
My hobby was radio-controlled model airplanes, and I got introduced. There were 3 or 4 other people there at CCK that were interested in. We ended up starting a model airplane club there. We got involved with Brother Jerry, who was a Jesuit missionary there, and he had started up a club with some of the local Chinese people there. So we kind of got together and had a lot of interesting interaction with some of the citizens in Taiwan through the model airplanes. I also did a lot of photography work, recorded music. There was really a lot of things to do at CCK.
Really?
So I kept pretty much busy when I was back there with model airplane activities. We invited some of the local Chinese modelers onto CCK Air Base so that they could fly at our little facility there, which it was not a normal thing at that point in time for a Chinese citizen to be invited onto what was a Taiwanese military base. We shared the base with the Republic of China, the Air Force there. And it was interesting to get them to come on base. We had to get special clearance from the president of Taiwan for them to come onto the base. And of course they invited us to come to their facilities, and we had dinner for them at the Officers Club there, and they invited us up to Taipei for Peking duck. So I got to know a lot of the local Chinese people, and that was very interesting to do.
Let's figure that. How was the food around there?
Shortly after I got to Taiwan, most of the people lived on base, but they declared the quarters for officers substandard. Most of the officers at that point in time moved off base and lived in Taichung, which was right next to where the air base was. And 3 or 4 of us would get together, rent a house, and hire a maid and a cook. And the standard of living there, they didn't get paid a lot in Taiwan, so we were able to get a nice house, a nice maid to cook dinner for us and stuff. She ran the house, she did all the washing and everything. So we lived downtown at that point most of the time, and got to interact with a lot more people that way down there. And I forgot what the question was.
Food.
Oh, food. Oh, food was remarkable. My wife's Irish, and she doesn't like strange food, so she would not have liked some of the food they had there, but the maid we had, she was just a fabulous cook. And every night was something different. The food was just fantastic. A lot of times we'd ask her, "What is this?" And she'd say, "You don't want to know. You don't want to know." She'd come back with flowers sometimes from the market, and they'd disappear, and then we'd say, "Well, what happened to the flowers?" "Oh, you ate, you ate." The true Chinese food, they have 5 different types of Chinese cooking that they do there, and she did 3 of the 5 types. And so every night was something different. Food was really nice there. The restaurants, there were quite a few restaurants in Taichung. We went to Taipei quite a bit to eat up there as well, but food was very nice.
That's good. So you stayed there for 15 months. Your family even got to visit a little bit. That's good. And so then what did you do? So you did you? I guess where did you come back to after that?
I was very fortunate personally. Most of the people that left CCK, they generally stayed in the C-130 community. Some of the assignments were to Strategic Air Command and B-52s. I came from Training Command when I went to CCK, and apparently I liked the last wing commander I had liked me, and he made sure when I came back that I got a really good assignment back in Training Command. So I ended up getting assigned to Shepherd Air Force Base in Wichita Falls, Texas, as a T-38 instructor pilot. It was a great airplane and a really great base. So I was fortunate that I had somebody looking out after me.
That's cool. My tech school was at Shepherd.
Was it?
Yeah, I was a weapons mechanic for the F-16.
Oh, okay.
And so pilot training was obviously there. They still were doing the pilot trainings on the T-38s out there. Mm-hmm. So we'd hear those screaming by all the time as we're doing our tech school, our training. It was pretty cool.
Shepherd was a little different because we had American pilot training there also, but they have what they call NATO pilot training, and they were training Germans and Norwegians and Danish, all kinds of people from Europe. And the Americans had their training syllabus, and the Germans had a different syllabus. The Germans were really good pilots when they got there. And our job was to make them even better when they left. They came into America to train because the German skies are rather crowded and the weather's not that good.
Wow.
So they did their training there. It's very interesting, very different than normal pilot training would be.
Really?
The training syllabus was different. You did a lot of things as an instructor there that you did not normally get a chance to do at the other training bases and training command. We got into combat training, high performance training in the airplanes that you just didn't normally do in normal American pilot training, because that was something that was follow-on training after you left pilot training.
Really?
So most of the Germans, when they left Shepherd, they went directly into high performance fighter airplanes. Whereas in the U.S. pilot training, they didn't normally get into a very high performance airplanes that quickly after you graduated. Germans just boomed right into a very high performance airplane. F-105s, F-100s, F-4s.
See, I was under the impression that T-38s was the fighter pilot or the high performance training, and that there is a separate school for the your carriers, bombers, or whatever else.
Yes, sort of. Back then it was a little bit different than it is right now. T-38 training, all pilots in the Air Force at that point in time went through the identical undergraduate pilot training program. And when you graduated from that, you would go to, you'd be put on a track, like a fighter track or a cargo track or a bomber track. And you stayed pretty much that in your career from that point forward. That's not what they do today, however. You're pretty early in your pilot training in the Air Force. You get kind of set into a track that you're going to be in, and not all pilots in the Air Force now fly T-38s. Not all of them would fly T-37s at that point. If you were going to be in a cargo track or something like that, you wouldn't be flying T-38s at all, probably.
Right.
But back then, all pilots went through that. It's just that in the NATO portion of it, at Shepherd, you had very experienced pilots from Germany and from some of the other European countries, so they came sometimes with 1,000 to 2,000 hours of flying time.
Wow.
So you were there more than just teaching them how to fly. You were trying to hone their skills that they had learned from the other airplanes they flew when they were in Germany.
That's really interesting. So, were you then assigned to both train Americans and train NATO pilots?
Yep. Most of the students there from Europe were German. There weren't that many from Norway and Denmark and the other places. Most were Germans. And we had German instructor pilots from the regular German Air Force there as well, which made kind of an interesting interaction. A lot of the German instructors that were there were World War II pilots as well. So we had some unique, interesting interactions with them. But they were very nice people, very interesting, a lot of fun discussions.
Wow. That's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, you described that it's different. And I'm trying to imagine what type of tactics that they were using at that point. I only know a lot, like as far as development of the aircraft's generations, how America's generational development of aircraft went. Not sure how Germany's was. Were you teaching more air-to-air combat, or was it air-to-ground, or a little bit of mix?
At that point in time, they came over, even though they had a lot of flying experience in other airplanes in Germany, they did not have a lot of high-performance airplane training. So they went through the regular U.S. Air Force pilot training system, but they had considerably more hours assigned to them. So instead of American pilots getting about 240 hours, they'd get around 360 hours. And we would get into some airborne combat tactics, no ground training at all as far as combat training, but a lot of aerial maneuvers, a lot of the tactics that you have when you're flying air combat and fighter airplanes. We got into a lot of that, and unfortunately none of the American students at Shepherd at that time didn't get any of that training at all. They just had the regular Air Force syllabus.
Right.
So it was interesting to be able to jump from the American syllabus to the German syllabus and fly missions. American students in a formation flight with German students in a formation flight. It's an interesting training process to mix the two of them together.
Not bad. So how long did you stay there?
I was there for 3.5 years.
3.5 years. And then where did you go from that point?
I was, again, went out to Military Personnel Center to try and steer my career a little bit. And I found out I was pretty much going to be a base ops officer somewhere in Korea flying a desk. And I said, I don't like desks. I joined the Air Force to fly airplanes. So I ended up getting out of active duty. I got hired by a Rhode Island Air National Guard at that point almost immediately. So I got to continue flying. And I flew C-130s, A models C-130s with the Rhode Island Air National Guard. And I stayed with them for 10.5 years.
Nice.
And pretty much got to fly about 80% of the Earth with the missions that the National Guard had.
Wow.
Pretty much the same stuff that the Air Force did with their C-130s. I was a part-timer, but I also had a business that I was trying to develop. So I had a lot of spare time, and I became the go-to pilot with the Guard. And if they had a mission going somewhere that they couldn't fill with somebody, they'd call me up and, hey, can you go to St. Croix tomorrow? Sure. So most Guards pilots, you'd be lucky to get 60 or 70 days of flying in the National Guard as a pilot. I would sometimes get 180 to 200 days a year. Pretty much flying all over the world.
That's pretty cool. Doing pretty much the same stuff.
Cargo, dropping parachutes, paratroopers. We lived right next to, close by, we had an Army base, so we did a lot of paratroop dropping there. And a lot of cargo missions, a lot of passenger missions. Not all over Alaska, Europe, South America. Some of our summer rotations were in Panama. So we got to fly throughout all of South America.
Nice.
The Caribbean, Azores, Europe.
Wow. So where did you ultimately end up retiring?
I retired from the Rhode Island Guard in 1987. And I had a couple of companies that I was trying to develop, moderately successful. And then I got hired by Eastern Airlines, so I went and flew with Eastern for a while until they went out of business. And eventually ended up as a design engineer for a hobby car, a big hobby company in Illinois, and designing radio-controlled model airplanes. So I stayed in aviation pretty much my whole career. I was very lucky.
Is it shocking to you to see that the Air Force has moved to unmanned aircraft?
Not at all. One thing about aviation, they're very slow to adopt technology. And some of the modern technologies that we have today, it's amazing what you can do with some of these technologies. Unfortunately, it's not getting into the Air Force or the airlines fast enough. In the hobby now, we have some drones. Everybody hears about drones now. These drones are amazing. If the military could just adapt the technology and the civilian drones, it's amazing what can be done with unmanned airplanes. To the point now where there's unmanned, and the Navy's experimenting with unmanned refueling of airplanes. An unmanned refueler refueling an unmanned drone. Just amazing. The GPS technologies, the control technologies, No, I'm not at all surprised to see the Air Force going for that. And for a lot of missions, a lot better way of doing it. A lot more controlled environment. You're not risking people as much as we had to in the Vietnam days.
Right. Well, just kind of wrapping up here. What characteristics did you learn in the military that you were able to apply now in the military?
It's unfortunate in our country that we don't require a lot of national service of some of our youth. A lot of our youth could use some of them. Having been through it yourself, the military teaches you a lot more than what your skills are. It's a lot of interpersonal skills, a lot of discipline, a lot of how to manage your life in a day-to-day business. That's something that I was not expecting when I first entered the service. A lot of people don't like it, a lot of people do. I was fortunate as a pilot that it's not like when you're in the Army, there's a lot more of that. But that's one thing that the youth of our day need, that kind of structure and discipline. Learning how to interact with people, how to get the most out of people, how to be a unit, how to have people that you can depend on and people that can depend on you. You just don't learn that in civilian life, and that's one thing the military gives you.
True. It's really good.
I don't know if you want any kind of wartime stories about some of the things involved in the military. There's I know that Rick Lansing, I think you just talked to a few minutes ago.
Mm-hmm.
He had some interesting experiences in Vietnam.
Yeah.
I flew several of the missions, the same type of mission, airdrop missions at Lock that he flew. And as a result of his experiences in the combat environment that was over Lock, they got hit by ground fire, and one of the crew members was killed, and they had a very serious damage to the airplane. And because I was a new instructor pilot, they grabbed a bunch of the crews and pilots that had the most experience at CCK, and the day after they had their mission, we were, hurry up, get in country, grab a bag, you're going to go fly airdrop missions at Lock. So we had 3 crews that were flown in right away, and we did a lot of the follow-on airdrop missions after Captain Caldwell on this mission that Lieutenant Lentz was on. And we got involved in redesigning the whole airdrop system that we were using in Vietnam for delivering ammunition and food and supplies to areas where the only way of supplying was through airdrop. It's kind of working with different ideas that people had and trying to get something together that minimized your exposure to the ground fire at Lock. And we ended up developing, tried several different high-altitude airdrop systems that didn't work because the parachute rigging and stuff was not correct on them. And did some very low-altitude, high-speed run-ins to the airdrop at Lock. And normal airdrops were done at 600 feet and 125 knots, and we went in at 50 feet as fast as the airplane would go, and at the very last minute, slow down, pulling those up at 300 or 400 feet, drop the cargo, and then roll right back and go right back down to the ground again. And we flew a couple of those missions, and those we were able to get the cargo on the drop zone, very small drop zone, the soccer field over there. But it was very dangerous, and they wouldn't let us keep doing it. Every airplane that we went out and did this with, a lot of battle damage on it. Started doing airdrops at night. If you might want to study that if you're interested in that type of thing, to study what happened in Analog, because pretty much we ended up supplying more ammunition and supplies to the North Vietnamese than we did to our own troops. But they eventually, with modern technology, they now have GPS guided parachute systems that you can fly your cargo right to any place you want to. And that didn't happen in Vietnam. You have a very small soccer field that you're airdropping supplies onto. And what probably isn't well known about the Air Force circles is the Army actually requested that we stop airdropping stuff there because they were the North Vietnamese was getting more of it than our American troops were.
That's crazy. So, so you were, how far into the 15 months was the analog drop mission for you?
I was 8 months, I believe. I'd been at CCK for 8 months, and so they rushed me through the upgrade process to become an instructor, and it was about a month and a half after I became an instructor that they started doing the drops at Analog. I was lucky that I was just a natural pilot. It was something natural for me. I was good at it, so they don't want the weak pilots and navs doing that type of mission, so I got selected to do that. And we did develop a system that worked, but it was just extremely dangerous. The CCK had 84 C-130s assigned to the wing, and 56 of those airplanes were damaged and battle damaged from flying airdrops.
Wow.
A very high damage rate, and we lost several airplanes, several crews. But we ended up developing some procedures that occasionally you get most of your cargo onto the drop zone. And it saved Analog. They got enough in that they were able to save Analog. And it wasn't just at Analog they were doing airdrops at Kontum and several other places in the country. But the process of developing the procedures and going out flying the missions, flying a night mission, we started airdropping at night, and then all the tracer ammunition coming up from the ground shooting at you, and all the stuff that was coming down from our forces. We had B-52s dropping, doing a bomb run beside us so that try and keep the troops on the ground, their heads down, fighters coming in and out, AC-130 gunships orbiting the area. Great fireworks display. It's dangerous, but great.
It's the 4th of July every time you flew over.
And unfortunately, we lost a few crews and a few airplanes. But it was, like many things you do in life, I'm really glad I got to do that. I wouldn't want to do it again, though.
Right.
You learn a lot about yourself. You learn a lot about the people around you. You learn a lot about how to organize yourself and how to be as effective as you possibly can be. It's not easy to go out and fly a mission that you know you have a really significant chance of getting shot down on.
I can't imagine it would be. This is getting, so this will be, of course, available for future generations to view. What message would you like to leave for them?
I think national service is a very important thing as citizens of the country that you should do. And whether it's many of the civilian processes you can go through for national service, Peace Corps, that type of stuff. Military service, if you feel that military would be good for you, I think the youth of the country would be doing a service to themselves, really, to join a military or a civilian service operation where you can contribute to the country. Not so much for what you can do for the country, although that's important, but what you can do for yourself. You really do learn a lot more than you think you're going to learn by doing that.
Very true. Is there anything that you feel that needs to be added to this interview?
I had a lot of fun in the military. I had a lot of fun in the Air Force. I flew a lot of great airplanes. Got to a lot of great places throughout the whole world. Got to do some very interesting things in airplanes. As an example, not legal then or now, but I was flying a T-38 with a German student from Shepherd Air Force Base to Nellis in Las Vegas, Nellis Air Force Base. And you fly right over the Grand Canyon when you do that. And they have what they call a Grand Canyon approach out there for the instrument approach procedure to get into Nellis Air Force Base. And we're flying over the canyon, and I couldn't resist it. I was on an IFR flight plan. I turned the transponder off, rolled the airplane inverted, dived down towards the canyon, got up to 650 knots, and buzzed the Grand Canyon in the T-38 at 650 knots. And spent about 15 seconds there, lit the afterburners, climbed back up to 38,000 feet where we started from, just in time for someone to say, "Hey, we lost your transponder, would you recycle it?" And one of the many things you do, dumb things in your life, got away with, didn't get caught. Had a really interesting time flying through the Grand Canyon.
Oh, wow.
And you can't get away with that nowadays, but back then that was relatively common. Maybe not to that extent.
You flew it. Did you fly inverted through the?
No,
or you just dove and you went inverted, dove down, and then
went through as fast as I could so nobody could get our tail number or anything.
Now, did the German pilot follow you?
He was a student. He was in the back seat of the airplane on an instrument training sortie.
Oh, I see.
I said, "Yeah, pull the hood back." I said, "If you ever tell anybody that, I'll deny all knowledge of it." And of course, it was a fun thing to do. So.
Yeah.
And I had another fun one to get in the T-38, taking off out of Pease Air Force Base in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Just before I got out of the Air Force, the wing commander let me take an airplane up to the Pease Air Force Base, which you don't normally do in the winter because the T-38 doesn't like icing conditions. But we made sure the weather was going to be good. And when I went to take off the next morning, I went up there to interview with the Rhode Island Guard to try and get a guard job. So the next morning when we took off, it was 20 below outside. And when I called for my instrument flight plan, the tower said that Boston Center wanted us to do an afterburner climb for controller training. Anybody that's ever flown a T-38 wouldn't believe how well that thing performs when it's cold outside. So we got to do the burner climb from sitting still on the runway, brake release, to level at 40,000 feet was 2 minutes and 46 seconds.
Wow.
And the airplane had the nickname of White Rocket. That's the fastest I've ever seen that airplane climb. And when we took off, Boston said, report passing 5,000 feet. We were already passing 12,000 feet. We accelerated from brake release to 400 knots in less than 8,000 feet of ground travel. Just phenomenal. Jeez. So in the military, you get to experience a lot of unusual and different things.
Yeah.
And that's one thing the youth really needs to get out and do. Even if it's in the Army, you wouldn't believe the kind of stuff you get to do in the Army. The Navy, the responsibilities that you have thrust upon you.
Oh, that's pretty incredible stuff. I'd like to thank you very much, Ernest, for sharing your story.
Okay.
And,
thanks for listening.
Yeah, well, with that concludes our interview.
Great.
Thank you for your service.